Good morning. It's about time to begin. I'm not sure where everyone is today. It seems like there's a giant hole with you two in this whole row. Yeah, okay, there you go. Yes, maybe a lot of people are traveling, or I'm not sure. So we're going to be in Judges. We're going to finish up the Samson story. We'll be covering chapter 15 and chapter 16. And that will really finish up the book of the Judges portion of the book of Judges. Remember, there's a prologue and there's an epilogue, and then we've so far covered all the Judges from Othniel to Samson. We'll finish Samson today. And that really will sum up the Judges themselves. So this will be a kind of an ending. Of course, we'll have still some more chapters to go. I'm out of town next week, so Kyle is going to teach this section, chapter 17, chapter 18, where Israel forages idolatry, which is the opposite to the epilogue, where they're facing idolatry, they're putting out idolatry. So it's showing how bad they've gotten and how they're basically becoming like the Canaanites. And Samson is almost a prototype for that because he becomes almost a Philistine in of himself. So we have a lot to get through, so I kind of want to kind of jump right in. Remember where Samson is. At the end of covering Samson, we'll tie it back to Othniel, so be thinking of some connections to Othniel. And we're getting pretty far down into the spiral of the judges' despair, basically, where everything just keeps getting worse. This is how we'll cover class today. We'll start with the first 8 verses where he ties the foxes together, and then his thing with the jawbone, and then Samson, Delilah, and then finally the death of Samson. And then we'll talk about some things that we can to apply today. So that is the plan. Kind of before we start, though, just a background because we're in the middle of a story. What have you, up until this point, what kind of do you think of Samson? What are some expectations of Samson to this point? How do you view him? What are some interesting things that have happened so far, just to kind of catch us up to this point in chapter 15? Yeah, he follows his eyes, and you'll see this even more. You saw it with the woman, the Philistine woman that he wanted to marry. He saw her, he wanted her. And he's going to follow his eyes the entire book, basically. He's what? He is kind of selfish and childish sometimes, and I think there's. Yeah, he'll either beat up someone to get it, or he'll cry to go get it. Good. He's kind of this person that has great expectations, just how he's born, how he is brought into the world, and the foretelling of an angel and everything. There's great expectation that he is going to save the people of Israel, but it just doesn't go to plan at all. And he does not follow what he is supposed to do. So you have all this expectation, but it just doesn't really count too much. And that's going to continue in chapter 15 and 16. So let's jump in to the first 8 verses. This is where he tries to go visit his wife-ish, his fiancée, who's now been given to a companion of his. And so he catches 300 foxes and takes torches and ties them between tails, and it just burns all of the grain. And so the Philistines don't like that, so they set fire to his fiance's now ex. I don't know what. His wife that was to be's father's house. And so that is kind of what happens in this section. They did some strange things. Yeah, they did. Setting the fox's tails on fire. Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting, like, how I mean, it's impressive to catch 300 foxes. Like, that's quite impressive. I don't know how you manage that feat, but catching 300 foxes and then tie their tails together with a torch in between, like, that's kind of impressive. Like, what else did you see in this first section? He is very vengeful. Yeah, he wants to get back at the Philistines for what?
I thought it was kind of interesting. The same phrase came out and we used today of the trouble you see the opposite way. He said, "But they did it to me, I'm gonna do it to them."
Yeah.
And the saying that came to my mind is, well, I'm gonna treat you the same way you treat me instead of doing to others.
Yes.
As you have done to
Yep. And we see this escalation between Samson and the Philistines where, okay, you do this, I'm going to do even worse. Okay, you do this, then I'm going to do even worse. And it just is topping each other and how much they can hurt each other, which is the opposite of what Jesus said. Yes. What about, why do you think Samson gets so angry with the Philistines here? What? Well, before then, the beginning of chapter 15. He gave his wife away. So this is a little bit in the difference between Greek culture and Israelite culture, and how they consummated the marriage. Israelite people believe that once you're engaged, you're basically married. You saw this with Joseph and Mary. Like he had to put her away, like divorce her when he thought that she had been unfaithful to him. It was like a divorce. It was cheating, that kind of stuff. It was everything associated with that when you're engaged. The Greeks and the Philistines, where the Philistines come from, Greek culture, they only saw it once they consummated the marriage and sex. That was the time that they were actually married together. And so you have this difference where the father of this woman already has the sunk cost of the wedding. So he's already spent a bunch of money for all the wedding, all the food, all the drinks, and whatnot. And so he's like, hey, I'm not doing this again. So if you don't want to marry her, Samson, then hey, you're the best man, you can marry her. And so that's what happened. And Samson saw it as some kind of adultery or maybe prostitution. And so that's why he gets so irritated, angry at them, and he goes sets their harvest on fire. And why do they get so, and I think it's important to know how big this is. This isn't just setting a few fields on fire, because it talks about two different, it talks about the stacked grain and the standing grain. So the stacked grain would have been the one that it was already in the stores, and the standing grain, which was already in the field. And that would have been huge. That would have been probably two harvests. So, I mean, like, that's a lot of food for our agriculture society. What that meant was probably maybe starvation at a large scale, definitely economic hits. This was a big deal. This wasn't just like a field on fire. It was a big deal to the Philistines and what they burned out.
I was going to say, going back to the beginning of the chapter, it's kind of interesting. I mean, her father thought that he hated her, and that's why he gave her away.
Yeah.
Samson never did hate her, but he assumed that he did.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
Is kind of interesting. Daryl?
Isn't this all in context of oppression?
Yes.
Oppression. So we see this not only as his reaction, but this is war.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, it's amazing to see this and contemplate, okay, here's one guy who is doing all of this to the Philistines. And they're afraid of him.
Very much so. they can't beat him.
And so, okay, the interplay there is very interesting.
Yes, very interesting.
Sounded alarming. You could catch 300 foxes, but, he killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. And how in the world, that seems preposterous.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. That's the next story. But yeah, he pulls off feat after feat that seems incredible, not unlikely at all. Do any of the main characters, especially the males, actually care about this woman at all? It seems like. Like, why does Samson go to visit her? I mean, like, it's, he says, I will go into my wife into the chamber. He's wanting to fulfill his sexual needs, is what he wants. Then the Philistines obviously don't care about her because they burn her. They set her father's house and her on fire. There's not a whole lot of people that actually care about this woman as her own independent character, which is part of what happens when you have a downward spiral of society, when men start treating women as property, as possessions, instead of their own people that can do their own thing. This is why when we get to Ruth will be very contrastive to a lot of the women, especially later on in Judges, because she enacts in the story. She is very proactive, unlike the women towards the end of Judges.
That's the way the Muslims treat their women now.
A lot, sometimes, yeah. Yeah. And this is also the second time we've seen a woman burned up for a man's folly. What was the first time? This is the second time we've seen a woman burned up because of a man's foolishness. Yes, Jephthah's daughter. Jephthah's daughter, which we just looked at. So it's very interesting, that correlation. And through all this, who does Samson actually care about? Samson. He's like, when he burns up his wife and her father, he's like, how dare you do this to me? Like, I can't believe you did this to me. Not, I can't believe you killed a poor innocent woman. It was, how dare you do this to me? And when his father-in-law gave away his wife, he was like, how dare you do this to me? That was the kind of constant, he's got a constant chip on his shoulder this entire time throughout this. But anything else in this section? Yeah, I'm thinking gift. I think that's, I don't know. I kind of read it as like a gift, like you would do that. What's very interesting is it's very similar to what Judah is and Genesis. There's a lot of similarities, it seems like, between Judah's story and Genesis, Judah and Tamar's story, and this one. So I don't know if there's just a lot of connections. Yeah. Yeah, possibly. But yes. It's very ironic. Not sure. I'm trying to think. Well, like you see Jacob having to work for a dowry to give to Leah and Rachel's father Laban. So I think it was a culture in which the prospective suitor gives gifts to the father. So yeah. And then yeah, we talked about that. Anything else in this section? The next section, which is the Philistines come for Samson, and this is where Samson takes out the jawbone of the donkey and kills 1,000 of them. And then you have this story about him being thirsty, asking for water, and God opening up a water for him.
Out of the jawbone.
What?
Wasn't it out of the jawbone, the water?
I think it was just out of the ground.
19 said, but God played a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water there out.
So in jaw is Lehi or Lehi, which I believe is a place.
The
So,
name of the place, that's true.
yeah. So I think it's out of a place, but the place is named that because of what happened with him
Right.
killing a bunch of people jawbone. Yes.
Well, as weird as trying to hail the 300 fox and finding them and getting to do that, it's just as weird taking this jaw and killing 1,000 people. They found a whole army. Did they all just stand around while he killed one
Yeah.
jaw?
Single combat. Yeah.
How could they not have gotten to him by the time they got to the
Yeah.
999th person?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how it's. Yeah. But what it says. I don't know. I mean, Shamgar killed what was it? 600, 700, 300? I don't know. A lot of people at the ox goad. So I don't know. What was it? Yeah, they just got a line 101 combat. I mean, like I would assume he took like some kind of high ground where it would, like it would reduce the number that could rush him at once. But yeah, and a lot of combat, especially ancient hand-to-hand combat, is a lot about courage and fear. If you could put fear into your enemies, and this is even in like lines of combat, you win. Basically, it's whoever can hold their resolve the longest. And so you have this guy where they're already afraid of him because he's killed a bunch of them, and he's very strong. He's done feats that no one else can. And then he just starts mowing down your enemy. They become afraid. You don't fight the same way. You lose your head. You may even be retreating, and he's coming on you at the same time. So I imagine it's something like that. No, I did not see the movie.
I was going to say, along the same lines, verse 14, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And if they saw him and he broke those bands and got free,
Yeah.
right? It could just be that he was chasing after him rather than them after him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you said, maybe they went into a cave or were just trying to hide out and he just finding them one by one.
Yeah. Very possible.
And then God had a hand in all this because you figured they had arrows, they could have, they didn't have to just
Yeah.
they're coming one by one.
Oh, yeah.
It was all God planned.
Yep, I agree. 100%. Yes, very much so. He even makes a song about it with jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps, with jawbone of a donkey, I've struck down thousands. Or I think I like the NIV's version better. It was like, out of a jawbone of a donkey, I made donkeys of them, something like that. Yeah, that's actually, I think, closer to what he's trying to get to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think they did a really good job in that version too, in kind of maintaining what the rhyme and what he's getting at. So, which, okay, have you seen? Do you know of another person in the Bible that was a mighty warrior that killed thousands of people, thousands of Philistines, and that was also a great poet? David, yeah. Like, I don't know. There's so many ties to David, and I think we're supposed to expect David to be another one of these judges, and he turns out actually okay. And I think David is what Samson could have been, I think is a good way of saying it. So. Yes. 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 Yeah. It's a very interesting story. What do you make of it? Yeah. No, I don't. I think he was just there to kill some Philistines. Was his main function. Let's go back to the beginning of the story real quick. So Judah finally appears on the scene. So like we've been waiting. I mean, you kind of wait because of what you know Judah will become. They're kind of the one that remains. Of the two kingdoms, when it eventually splits into, Judah's definitely the most faithful between them and Israel. And so you're kind of waiting for Judah to come on the scene. They haven't been on the scene since the very beginning of the book. And so they come on the scene, and what do they do?
What did they do or want to do?
What did they do?
They go up to Samson and they're like, hey man, we're oppressed by these Philistines. You keep mucking things up for us. You're coming with us and we're going to hand you over.
Yeah.
They want to do that. And with the story, he lets them tie him up and has them make the promise. Make sure promise you don't kill me. And when he gets down there.
So they go down to him and they hand over their best warrior to those who are oppressing them. Like, what do you expect them to do? Like every other judge we've had, like rally around them and start fighting and, like throw off the oppressors, this is the time. But they're just totally placated. It's just like, okay, we're oppressed. Let's just bear through it. Samson, stop agitating them. You're making it worse for us. And it's a lot like where Israel will get to in Moses. So Samson is also like almost an anti-Moses character here too, especially in this story. You have a similar thing with Moses going up to Pharaoh and saying, "Let my people go." He says, "I'm going to make their lives even harder." Israel does not appreciate that. You have also him bringing water out of the ground, a lot like what Moses did in the wilderness. And then he even calls himself the servant of the Lord, which is a title Moses is given to Moses as well. So this is actually a Moses story, but Samson is like a brutal warrior Moses type character. But yeah.
I got thinking about Julius Caesar, right? They was killing him in the eyes of much. He accepted Saul. Brutus, and he said, "Eat you, Brutus." He said, Mark Anthony said, "Well, I did not because I never did this. I never more."
Yeah.
So Judas taking the power, we passing him. Not that we don't love you, but it's for the good of.
It's good of the people, which remember all of that, because that's going to come back. Let me see here. So Gilbert and Jockey. So we've seen this before. Improvised weapons and judges killing a lot of people. God doesn't need spears and chariots and and like great level technology to win. He can use a jawbone donkey. He can use a tent peg. He can use a ox goat to win. That's what he can do to save his people. And then I think we already talked about that. Yeah, Samson being thirsty. I will remark that this is like the first time that he actually does turn to God and ask for help. Every other time, it's like, yeah, let's go get him. And he like relies on his own might, and he doesn't necessarily realize that God is behind it all and helping it all. And so I think that that may be something, I don't know, maybe he realizes he thinks his strength is his own, not provided by God, but he does rely on God to fulfill his thirst. And God answers him, too. God answers him. What did you say?
Where were the people getting the water before Samson asked for it?
I guess they didn't have water in that land. I mean, Israel is a pretty wilderness type land. If you didn't have really wells dug in the area, there's no like springs really. Other than the Jordan River, there's just not a whole lot of water in Israel. That's why, especially in Genesis, there's a lot of fighting over wells because that's like everything.
Plus you figure out that Samson doesn't kill that many people. All the effort that he used.
Oh, yeah.
He's gonna use everything.
Yeah, and like even for somebody who's really strong, swinging pretty hard with something, just 1,000 times, much less, probably more than that to like take out some enemies, plus like having to go through something, that's tiring, like very, very tiring. So yeah, I'm not surprised with that. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's kind of even going back to Moses, where when Moses strikes the rock and he says, must we bring water out of this rock to you that holds you?
Yeah.
And then in this case, he doesn't even mention God, even though God can supply the water to him. He names the spring after himself.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
Moses is very good until that point.
Yeah.
And then Samson is very bad until he asks God for water, and then he immediately goes back and does the same, the worst thing Moses ever did that
Yes.
got him prevented from going into the promised land.
Yeah. Samson's best is Moses' worst.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah. Yeah. All right, we gotta move on. Chapter 16. So this is Samson and Delilah, that whole story. What did you see here? What stood out to you? What was interesting?
Backing up just a little from the previous section,
Okay.
I kind of see Samson offering himself up almost like a Trojan horse to Judah, saying, hey,
Yeah.
tie me up and take me to him. Don't kill me. Tie me up, take me to him.
Yeah.
Of course, he didn't have the foresight that God was going to give him great strength to break
Yeah.
these ropes. But
I think throughout the book, though, I think Samson thinks his strength is his own. I think he doesn't realize that I think he understands the Lord gives him the strength, but he's begun to think of it as his own thing. And so I think he does think it's his own, and I think he's going to break out of it. As long as you don't kill me, I'll just break out of these and I'll go kill a bunch of them, and like it's nothing. So, chapter 16, Samson and Delilah. So you have you have Samson and Delilah, but before you get there, there's this brief little period where he goes to Gaza and sees a prostitute, and he's there, and they hear that he's there, and they're going to wait till morning to kill him. But what does he do in the middle of the night? Yeah, he leaves and he takes what with him? The gates. And this isn't just like some little puny gate that you have in your house. This is the gates to the city. It's being huge. And where does Samson carry those gates? Top of the hill. Where? In Hebron. Where is Hebron? It's in Judah. It's in Judah. And so he kind of, it's almost something in the face of the Judah people who just handed him over. This is what you're giving up, your mighty warrior. And also Hebron is 40 miles away from Gaza. So he carries these gates for 40 miles on his back and then sets them up on the hill in Hebron. Very, very impressive feat of strength. But after this is where he meets Delilah. So what do you make of Delilah? What?
She's just like he.
Kinda, yeah.
if he just had the mental capacity to match the strength, Because the men, it's like a cartoon.
Yeah.
You're gonna keep letting this woman tie you up and ask you what it's gonna take.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not good. Right. Men can be very, oh, I'm not saying that. She has fooled him to the nth
Yes.
degree. And he takes it.
And you realize the Philistines know where his weakness is because that's where they go for. They go for him. And like, how much money do they offer her?
1,100 pieces.
That's a stupid amount of money. That is so much money. A slave is 30 pieces of silver, shekels of silver, in the Bible. Abraham pays a lot of money for the land that he buys for a burial plot for Sarah, and that's only 400 shekels of silver. 1,100 shekels of silver is so much. It's exorbitant amount of money. But that kind of shows you how much the Philistines want this guy dead, detained, tortured, whatever, off the picture. They're willing to give up just an exorbitant amount of money to get rid of this dude. It kind of depends on how you read it. It's not necessarily clear if each leader was giving 1,100 shekels of silver, or if together they were giving 1,100 shekels of silver. It kind of depends on how you read it. It's not clear. I kind of think it's the 5 of them giving 1,100 shekels of silver because it's such a large amount, and that 55 would be just even more. Like that would be like kingdoms. So yeah.
Just as for kind of what Jen was saying about men, I think the way she's looking for is thick.
Thick-headed, and we'll get to that part a little bit. So does Samson not know what's going on there? Like, especially with Delilah. Like, I mean, he asks for a great strength. He gives a fake one. She uses it, and the Philistines are magically there. And this happens 3 times. Does he not know what's going on here?
I think he just enjoyed playing with her. He's been at the end of battles now, and he's feeling pretty triumphant and being a man.
Yeah.
And I imagine she was very bewitching, and he just couldn't leave her alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also because he had that soft spot for women, you could see he was starting to give in when he told her the last time.
Yeah.
Tie his things to my
He gets
hair.
closer and
So
closer.
he was inching towards it, and
Yep.
Did he really understand when he said cutting my hair is the, and the reason, I mean, I know that he says, it says that he told her what was on his heart, but his hair had never been cut, so he doesn't really know, and had he ever been told that this is where your power comes from?
Yeah.
He was so arrogant and full of himself. I think this was just a big game to him because I'm Samson, they can do whatever they want to,
Yep.
and I'm going to come out of it fine. And because he wasn't giving credit to the Lord, he was
Nope.
thinking it was him. So that arrogance there, I think that's, he is ultimately surprised that he is not, he can't hold his own when his hair is cut, but
Yeah. I think you're right. I think he knows the letter of the law as far as, I'm not supposed to have my hair cut. But I think he's seen his strength as his own, and that's not a gift from God. And he touched dead things, and it didn't go away. And he drank wine and through the vine, and it did not go away. Why would it go away when my hair's cut? Like, it's fine. I'm Samson, all
right.
that.
And other people under the Nazarite law didn't have the same strength that he had.
Yep.
So he was unique. I am special.
Yep.
I am, God just made me amazing.
Yep.
And I can do whatever I want to do. And I think that's ultimately, because he's playing this game, this very dangerous, stupid game.
Yes. And if you want some more evidence for that kind of thinking. After his hair being cut, he raises up and he says, I'm going to feed them like every other time. And it's not because he didn't know his hair was cut. He would know when that much hair is cut off. It's that he thought his strength was in himself, not from God.
Plus, he got so agitated when they kept asking him about all these things why he was stranded.
Yep.
I might as well just go and tell the truth. That way, just leave me alone.
Yep. And I'll still keep my strength. Yeah.
That's how pure they are between them, just like Adam and God and Eve, right? And Eve sort of had
Yep.
to take Gallie up. The Bible makes it clear that Samson, Delilah kept asking him, this and this and this, like she worried him to death. Even like the parable we find here in the king, that, arrogant, he didn't believe in God, because the poor widow kept badgering him.
Right. Yeah. I don't think necessarily that's a good thing to do, but it's definitely effective. Also, do you know what Delilah's name means? I forgot to mention this earlier. It means night. So it's related to the Israelite word Lila, which means night. Night.
N-I-G-H-T?
Yes. Which is, what does Samson's name mean? Sun. So it's sun boy versus night girl is basically the thing that's going on here. The night girl takes the sun boy's strength away. And so you kind of, it's very intentional. All names are intentional. This is the first woman that's named in Samson's story that's given a name. That's a very intentional name. It's to get across to a thematic point across. So.
It says in verse 20, he didn't know that the Lord had departed from him after his hair was cut. And I thought I heard somebody mention that he never gave the Lord credit for anything he did. I think he probably did know that the Lord did. If he didn't know the Lord had departed from him, he must have known something beforehand that he had been with him.
I think he began to think that his strength that he had was his own instead of the Lord being with him, a sign of the Lord being with him. And so he thought that he still had that strength, but when he went out, he realized he didn't have that strength and that the Lord was not with him.
On verse 17, he told Delilah
Yeah.
that being a Nazarite, that the hair gave him the strength.
Yeah.
And I thought I heard somebody say that. Maybe he wasn't aware that his hair gave him, but I'm not sure I heard that. But anyway.
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of nationalistic pride here, for lack of a better term. Go back to when he's asking for water, he says, lest the uncircumcised kill the circumcised.
Yeah.
If we can't let the evil people be good people.
Yep.
You know, what it boils down to. And it's the same type of thing here, almost like it doesn't really matter what he does, but he's on the right side, so he's going to win.
Yes, that too. Yeah.
That feels real for me.
Yes. Yes.
I believe, in the beginning, the reason why he fell because he went against his parents. His parents told him that we have many other people in our group, our family. We can get one of our family, one of the women from our family.
Right.
He didn't want those women. He
No.
wanted something that the women that he lust after.
Yep.
So that's where he fell, his first fall started.
Yep.
See, and he knew that it was in his hair because no matter how many times he asked him about his weak point, he was saying all these other lies and he confessed.
Yep.
It was here, so he knew his strength was in his hair.
Yeah, I think that he knew it, but there's a difference between here and here sometimes. And I think that he thought he still had his strength, even though he gave up his secret. What finally made Samson break and give him the actual secret? Give Delilah the actual secret. What did she say? Yeah, you don't love me. Which really, I think what it's going here is like, do you love me or God more? And then Samson makes his choice that he loves Delilah. And then I think the reason he ended up giving up his secret is because he didn't think it would matter. He'd still be Samson. He knew that by the letter of the law that's the reason. His hair did give him strength, but he didn't really think God would leave him, that God would be with him even despite his mistakes. We're going to have to move on because we're coming up to time. This is Samson's death. This is after they've captured him and they bring him to the temple, and they're giving praise to him. Very interesting. Who do the Philistines give credit to defeating Samson? Their God, Dagon, which is interesting because Israel seems to never give credit to their God at all for anything they do, and it's kind of like a contrary, contrast of that. And I think that's one of the reasons that God answers is because He's got to show that He is still superior over Dagon. And then finally, what are some connections that you can make to Othniel's story? What are some similarities that you discovered? So there's a few. Is Othniel Israelite?
No.
But he wants to become one. He marries Caleb's daughter. He becomes an Israelite. Samson he was an Edomite. Samson, is he an Israelite? Yes, but does he want to be an Israelite? No, he wants to be a Philistine. And so you have this contrast between these two people. You also have, I don't know if this is a big one, but Timnah is the name of Othniel's grandmother. Samson married a guy from the daughter of a guy from Timnah. Othniel, both in Othniel's story and Judah and Samson's story, Judah is both mentioned. Othniel marries the Israelite, the daughter of Caleb. Samson marries a foreigner. And Othniel brings 40 years of peace, and there's 40 years of oppression before Samson comes in. They're just contrasting figures in which they eventually go down more and more, and this is the bottom of the spiral. A couple of themes really quick to end with. Samson is a very tragic figure because there's all this hope that he is going to be the great savior, but he is pretty much sold out by everyone in his life. Everyone in his life is selling him out in one way or another, and he's betrayed almost by everyone in his life, it seems like. And so you get the feeling that he feels like he has to make it on his own, that he has always got a chip on his shoulder, and that everyone will betray him except for God. God is the one that's consistently, faithfully with him until eventually he just leaves God completely. And Samson does not fully realize how much God is with him and his potential until it gets too late. And so Samson is this person that could have been, but never actually is. And he's a prototype of Israel because of that. Israel could have been so great, but they refused to trust in God. And also, Samson is a failed Jesus. You can't help but see Samson's story and see the connections. Both are divine savior that God has raised up to save Israel. Both have birth narratives that are very similar. Instead of being welcomed by their people, they are instead tied up and handed over to foreign oppressors. Both are sold out for silver, mocked, beaten, and scorned. And in both, their death achieves more than their life. Samson is this failed savior, and he is instead a failed Jesus character. And the difference between Samson and Jesus, there are very many, but Samson dies for his own sin. Jesus dies for everyone's sin. And Samson lived for the death of his enemies, and Jesus died for the life of everyone in the world, including his enemies. You can imagine Samson's last words on the cross, if he was on the cross, is remember what they've done to me, versus Jesus' last words on the cross, remember not, because they don't know what they're doing. So, very, very cool character, very cool book. And it's just really cool to see those connections. Next week, we'll do Judges 17, 18, and we'll part one of the epilogue. Thank you for your